Okay, let's dive in. There's been a really major decision that just landed, and it's affecting, well, hundreds of thousands of people right here in the U.S.
Yeah, a huge impact. Welcome to the deep dive, everyone.
Today, we're really focusing on this U.S. Supreme Court ruling. It just came down May 30th, 2025.
And it's about these humanitarian parole programs.
Yeah.
Big implications.
Exactly. So our goal here, our mission for this deep dive is to really unpack it. What exactly did this ruling do? Who's feeling it right now? Where did this whole program even come from?
And the legal fight behind it, the back and forth, and what it might mean going forward. We've looked at everything we could find on this.
Yeah, we're trying to cut through all the noise, give you the clearest picture based on what's out there. Think of it as us figuring this out together.
Right. So let's get into it. What actually happened?
Okay, so the headline event. May 30th, the Supreme Court lifts a hold. A lower court had basically paused a Trump administration plan.
And that plan was specifically aimed at ending a humanitarian parole program, right?
Exactly, the one the Biden administration set up. It started back in 2022, first for Venezuelans.
Then in 2023, it expanded. Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans were included too.
Right. And the core idea was it gave people a way to come here legally, get work authorization, stay for 2 years.
But it wasn't automatic. There were conditions, weren't there?
Oh, yeah, definitely. People needed a financial sponsor already in the U.S., someone who could basically vouch for them and support them.
And security checks, I assume.
Absolutely. Security background checks were part of it. And crucially, they had to pay their own way to fly into the U.S.
So the whole structure was kind of designed as an alternative, maybe a safer one than, trying to cross the border irregularly.
That was the framing, yeah. And the
Right.
numbers involved here are pretty staggering.
How many people are we talking about?
The program covered 532,000 migrants who used this specific route.
Wow, over 500,000 people. That's
Yeah.
significant.
It really is. And the Trump administration's move against it was fast. President Trump signed an executive order about these categorical parole programs, as they called them,
When was that?
January 20th, 2025, literally his first day back in office.
Okay, so immediate action.
And then by March, the Homeland Security Secretary, Kristi Noem, she announced the program was done, terminated, effective immediately.
And this Supreme Court ruling that just happened, the one lifting the hold, how was it delivered? Was it a big, detailed opinion?
No, actually, that's one of the striking things. It was apparently a brief, unsigned order, not a lot of explanation provided, just lifting the stay.
Letting the termination plan move forward? For now, at least.
Right. But there was dissent. Justices Ketanji Brown Jackson and Sonia Sotomayor disagreed.
Okay. What did they say?
Justice Jackson's dissent was pretty powerful. She basically warned that this decision lets the lives of 500,000 migrants unravel all around us before the courts even fully settle the legal questions.
Wow. That really underscores the immediate human stakes involved here.
Absolutely. Which brings us right to that point. Why does this matter so much? It's not just legal theory. It's people's lives being turned upside down.
Yeah, the human impact is enormous. We found some stories that really illustrate this.
Like Wilfredo Sanchez. He's 73, a retired professor from Venezuela living out in Denver with his daughter. She's a U.S. citizen.
Okay. And he came through this program.
And he has health problems, diabetes, hypertension. His words were just chilling. He said, "To return is to die, not just because of my medical conditions, but from loneliness."
Oh, man. That's heartbreaking. Loneliness, that adds another layer entirely.
It really does. And then there's Carlos Daniel Urdaneta. He's younger, 30, also from Venezuela.
What's his situation?
He's working in Atlanta in a restaurant trying to send money back to his sick mother in Venezuela. He talked about how hard things are there, said he'd work triple back home if he could.
But he's scared about staying here now.
Exactly. Scared of being undocumented under the current administration's focus. He said, "I won't risk it." So he's facing this awful dilemma.
You can just imagine the anxiety spreading through communities, right?
Yeah.
Like Miami, where you have so many people from Cuba, Haiti, Venezuela.
Definitely. We saw Eduardo Gamara. He's a professor at Florida International University. He pointed something out. President Trump has talked about deporting 3,000 migrants a day.
That was a campaign point.
And Professor Gamara's take was, look, to get numbers like that, you inevitably have to target people already here, people whose status is now uncertain, like these parolees.
That makes a grim kind of sense. And people within those communities must be feeling it intensely.
Yeah, Philip Brutus, he's a Haitian immigrant himself, and an immigration lawyer down in Florida. He called this ruling a deep cut.
A deep cut.
Yeah. He stressed how unstable and dangerous things still are in Haiti, making forced return terrifying for many. He described it like this temporary safety net just vanishing overnight. Even though it had a time limit, the abruptness is a shock.
And the lawyers fighting for these migrants.
Karen Tumlin, one of the lead lawyers, she had a really strong reaction, called it potentially the largest mass deportation in the nation's history.
Wow. That's a huge claim.
She described it as a sad day for people who tried to follow the rules, who used this legal pathway. And she raised another really important flag.
What's that?
That this ruling might not just affect this specific group, it could potentially impact other humanitarian parole programs too. She mentioned the ones for Ukrainians and Afghans.
Oh, right. So the implications could be even broader. Hundreds of thousands more people, potentially.
It raises that worrying possibility, yeah.
So maybe we should step back a bit. This whole idea of humanitarian parole, where did it come from? Is it new?
Not at all, actually. When we looked into it, its roots go way back to the 1952 Immigration and Nationality Act.
Okay, so it's been on the books for a long time.
Yeah, and it basically gives the president or the administration really the power to let certain individuals or groups enter the U.S. temporarily.
For what reasons?
The law says for urgent humanitarian reasons or if it provides a significant public benefit. It's discretionary authority.
And has it been used much before this big program?
It has, yeah, though maybe not always on this scale. There are historical examples like President Eisenhower using it for Hungarians fleeing the Soviet crackdown in the 50s. And more recently, it's been crucial for helping Ukrainians escaping the war and also for Afghans who worked with the U.S.
Okay, so it's a tool presidents have used. But Joe Biden really leaned into it with this particular program for Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans.
He definitely expanded its use significantly. It started with Venezuelans in 2022, then broadened in 2023. And the stated reason was clear, trying to manage the border.
Right. Create a legal channel, discourage those irregular crossings by offering this alternative pathway. With all those conditions we mentioned, the sponsor, the checks flying in.
Exactly. But the Trump administration obviously had a very different view.
Yeah, what was their core objection?
Their argument basically was that this wasn't a proper use of parole authority at all. They saw it as essentially a backdoor for illegal immigration.
A loophole, they called it.
Pretty much. They argued it was way too broad, gave too much discretion, and essentially bypassed existing immigration laws. They wanted it shut down.
Which inevitably led to a court battle.
Right. So in February 2025, after the termination was announced, a group of migrants who were already here under the program, plus their U.S. sponsors, they sued.
Trying to block the termination. What was their legal argument?
The main thrust was that, under the law, parole decisions are supposed to be individualized, case-by-case assessments. You can't just issue a blanket termination for an entire category of 500,000 people.
Okay, so a procedural argument about how parole is supposed to work.
Exactly. And initially, the lower courts were receptive to that.
What happened there?
In April 2025, a federal judge in Boston, Judge Indira Talwani, she looked at it and said, yeah, this mass termination is likely illegal.
So she stopped it.
She issued what's called a stay, basically putting the termination on hold while the case moved forward. And then the appeals court, the First Circuit, they agreed with her. They upheld the stay.
Gotcha. So the program was temporarily safe.
Until the Trump administration took it higher, filing an emergency appeal straight to the Supreme Court.
Arguing the lower courts got it wrong, I assume.
Right. And that leads us back to May 30th, when the Supreme Court justices, in that short, unsigned order we mentioned, sided with the administration.
Lifting the stay. Removing that temporary protection.
Exactly. And again, the dissenting justices, Jackson and Sotomayor, warned about the potential devastating consequences of doing that before the case is fully resolved.
It's crucial to remember, though, the case itself isn't technically over, right? It goes back down.
Correct. It's heading back to the First Circuit Court of Appeals for them to hear the full arguments on the merits. But the immediate effect is that the administration can move forward with ending the program while that happens. The pause is gone.
Okay. And this whole situation, this ruling, it doesn't exist in isolation, does it? It seems to fit into a broader picture of what's happening with immigration policy right now.
Oh, absolutely. It's clearly linked to President Trump's overall approach, his campaign promises about mass deportations, and this administration's wider effort to dismantle many of the Biden-era immigration policies.
And wasn't there another recent ruling affecting a large group of migrants, too?
Yes, that's right. We found information about a separate decision that essentially allowed the government to revoke temporary protected status, or TPS, for about 350,000 Venezuelans.
Okay, so that's another large group facing uncertainty.
Mm-hmm. And if you add those numbers together, the 532,000 from this parole program we're focused on, plus those 350,000 Venezuelans losing TPS.
You're getting close to 1 million people.
Yeah, the sources suggest nearly 1 million people whose legal status or protection in the U.S. is suddenly at risk or gone.
Wow.
That's a staggering number to comprehend in human terms.
It really is. Were there other related things happening mentioned in what we looked at?
A couple of other points surfaced. There was apparently some pushback in the courts against the administration trying to use a pretty old law, the Alien Enemies Act,
Okay.
to try and deport certain Venezuelans to El Salvador based on alleged gang connections. The court seems skeptical of using that specific law in that way.
Interesting. What else?
And then there was the move by Homeland Security to publish that list, 500 jurisdictions they labeled as sanctuary locations.
Ah, the sanctuary cities issue.
Mm.
And the implication was they might lose funding.
That was the threat, yeah.
Yeah.
Though we saw that many of the cities on the list were pushing back, saying they shouldn't be on it or disputing the label.
So lots of moving parts. But from the administration's perspective, what's their justification for all this? For ending the parole program specifically?
Their stated view is pretty consistent. This is about restoring order, enforcing laws they believe were ignored or bypassed. They frame the Biden parole program as an illegal loophole that encouraged unauthorized migration.
And they argued that reviewing each case individually, like the lawsuit demanded, was just not feasible.
Exactly. They called that prospect a gargantuan task. Their goal seems to be streamlining the process, making deportations quicker, especially using something called expedited removal.
Okay, so the legal battle is ongoing, but the immediate protection is gone. What happens now? What are the next steps, realistically, for these people?
Well, legally, as we said, the case goes back to the First Circuit Court of Appeals. That process will take time.
But for the individuals, the 500,000 migrants, their status is now effectively ended or ending.
It seems their parole status is terminated or in the process of being terminated, yes. So their immediate path is incredibly precarious.
Could they apply for something else, like asylum?
That's potentially an option for some, yes. Applying for asylum, maybe other forms of protection, but the asylum system is notoriously backlogged. It's a long, complicated process, and there's absolutely no guarantee of success.
And do we even know how many of these 532,000 might have already started pursuing other options while they had parole?
That's a really good point. Kathleen Bush-Joseph, an expert cited in the material, highlighted that lack of clarity. We don't really know how many might have already filed for asylum or something else. It just adds another layer of uncertainty.
And then there's just the sheer practical side of it. If the ultimate goal is deportation, actually removing 500,000 people.
Yeah, the logistics are mind-boggling. That requires an immense amount of time, money, personnel, international cooperation. It's not something that happens overnight, regardless of the legal status.
So a huge challenge there. And what about reactions? What can we expect to see?
Well, certainly strong reactions. We're likely to see protests, especially in communities heavily impacted, like in Florida. More lawsuits are probably inevitable.
Yeah, advocacy groups will likely fight this.
Definitely. We saw that quote from Ghislaine Joseph of the Haitian Bridge Alliance. She called the Supreme Court's decision a blatant disregard for vulnerable people. That captures the sentiment we're likely to hear a lot more of.
So let's try to wrap this deep dive up. The scale of this decision is just immense. We're talking over 500,000 lives, maybe closer to 1 million when you combine it with the TPS decision, thrown into turmoil.
Yeah, there are futures here, there's stability. It's all suddenly uncertain because these specific humanitarian protections have been lifted by this Supreme Court action.
And throughout this, we've really tried to stick to the facts as we found them. What happened, who it affects, the program's background, the legal arguments back and forth, and what might lie ahead.
Right. And it's clear this ruling forces us to confront some really fundamental questions, doesn't it? About how the U.S. balances immigration policy, border security, the rule of law.
And basic humanity and compassion, especially when dealing with people fleeing difficult situations. It's like a complex balancing act.
So here's something maybe for you, our listeners, to think about as this moves forward. The legal fight isn't over, and the practical challenges of implementing this decision are huge.
So what does this ruling, lifting these protections now, really signal about how humanitarian relief might be approached in future crises? And maybe more importantly, how will the system legally, logistically, humanly actually navigate the path forward for these hundreds of thousands of individuals caught in the middle right now?
That's definitely something to keep mulling over as the story continues to unfold. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Until next time.